Putin has been cornered. Trump has made a decision regarding Russia, and now neither Alaska nor Lavrov's threats will help. Absolutely hopeless ventures. Weapons, weapons, and more weapons. What kind of security guarantees for Ukraine are currently being negotiated in the European Union? Even NATO's Article 5 never dreamed of this. And the occupiers' oil industry is burning again. How will the systematic destruction of the Russian Federation's oil sector lead to its collapse in the near future? That's what we're going to talk about right now. This is the Razborka Project, and I'm Alexander Prepodobny. Let's get started. Friends, let's welcome Rostyslav Murzahulov, political strategist, after a long break. He's back on the air with the Razborka Project. Rostyslav, we're glad to see you. Welcome.
Hi, the feeling is mutual. The break wasn't my fault.
Agreed. Will you tell us about the news? Where have you been? What have you been up to? But let's start with this. Lavrov recently gave an interview that seems to cut off any attempts by Trump to negotiate with Putin in Alaska. And let me remind our audience that he called any agreements on security guarantees for Ukraine in which Russia is not involved, in other words, the country that is trying to eliminate Ukraine, an absolutely pointless endeavor. In addition, he is once again trying to revive the so-called Istanbul agreements, which exist only in his imagination, and says that if what Russia tried to impose at the start of the full-scale invasion is not discussed again, then basically the war will continue. The war. Bloomberg responded, citing US officials in the White House, that in fact Lavrov's refusal to provide security guarantees for Ukraine effectively broke off all negotiations between Russia and the US. How do you see the essence and the basis of this? And what do you truly think about it, in your honest opinion?
Well, no, they didn't actually break anything off with us back then. Well, you asked a very broad question, so I'll answer it just as broadly, so that the viewers can understand what is basically, on a global scale, happening right now on this track. Why was it that on that night when Zelensky was in Washington, among other strong leaders of the democratic world, why was I so excited and why was I pleased with what was happening there? Because if we set aside all the rhetoric about Putin supposedly winning something, what's happening both in Alaska and in Washington and all those ridiculous statements from Lavrov afterwards is an absolute defeat for Putin. Let me explain why. Let's rewind 10 years back, or even 15, but not as far as the Munich speech. All right, let's go back about 15 years, shall we? And what do we see there? We see that Putin, who was once a timid, gray KGB mouse, paid very close attention to any movement from America, from Europe, and from his own liberals, among whom I count myself, though back then I was just a minor figure, but still somewhere nearby. By the way, back then, I might not have told you this, I participated twice in the administrative reform program during those years. It was a program, and you'll probably laugh now, that was a joint effort between the Kremlin, the US State Department, and the European Union administration. The program was called Administrative Reform Exchange of Experience for Young Politicians. I went on 2 extended business trips through this program, visiting universities, all those beautiful White Houses and Congresses in the UK, at the 3rd most prestigious university, at Durham University, and also at all the right places in the European Union, because back then Putin was a timid, grey, office-bound KGB mouse. And he clearly understood that there was a very specific and predetermined track that one absolutely had to follow, and if anyone ever tried to deviate or go another way, they would immediately and quite brutally tear them to pieces, leaving no chance for survival. What happened next? Then something very simple happened, actually very simple. Why do all the constitutions in the world have a 2-term limit, no more? Because after 2 terms, any president, my friends, starts to lose his mind. And he did too. Especially since he was completely surrounded by Russian people who possessed centuries of extensive experience in profound submission, in meticulously flattering and diligently licking every single part of their powerful boss. And all these people would say to him, "Father, why on earth are they twisting our arms here, you see?" Accordingly, that's when this imperial Putinist paradigm began. It was at that time that Putin decided to try to create, as he himself said back then, an alternative center of influence. In other words, let it not be just America, let Russia also have some influence. Back then, he put it rather gently. This did not yet mean that he would start threatening everyone with nuclear war or constantly attacking neighbors, waging bloody maniacal wars there. But even then, it became clear that he was starting to move in the wrong direction. This happened specifically on the day when he and Medvedev switched back, and it became clear that yes, the power vertical in Russia had prevailed. Putin started believing in himself, believed in his KGB friends, and was about to drive out all the liberals for good. And on that day, I bought a ticket to Paris and enrolled in a business school there, basically with the intention of staying. So what happened today, right? Alaska and Washington. What actually happened is that he got right back in line because finally everyone collectively told him together, the entire group gathered there. And first, Donald Trump himself told him, after engaging in extensive discussions for a considerable period with the various Europeans and with President Zelensky and with the nation of Ukraine as well, if not primarily, he conveyed to him a very simple and direct thing. If you persistently continue your rebellion, we will absolutely destroy you economically, politically, and perhaps even physically. Please just look at what I did to Fort. Go ask the Ayatollahs how they're doing. All the Ayatollahs are still alive after Trump gave them a lesson in discipline. And our nuclear blackmail is stronger than yours. Our Trump cards are more powerful. Here you go, nuclear submarines right in your underbelly. And that's what I call an ultimatum. And here you have 50 days. No, 50 is too many. You get 10 days. And quickly report to me at the Washington Regional Committee on my turf. How are you going to get out of this mess? So first Alaska, then Washington, then all these words about how yes, we'll resolve everything through negotiations. Nothing will be resolved through negotiations. It's all just rhetoric, just a backdrop for these meetings. Sasha, you're a reasonable person. You never believed there would be a meeting between Zelensky and Putin, and there won't be a signing or a handshake between them. That's nonsense. It's absolutely impossible because it simply can't happen. You can't sign an agreement with Godzilla, who's walking around the city killing people. And that was never actually planned in the first place. Trump is simply giving Putin this opportunity. Yeah, I'm putting you back in your place. But if you want to keep up this appearance of being someone we can talk to, fine, keep your face. I'll even say that you'll meet with everyone now, and we'll sign something with you. No one is going to sign anything with him. All that's required of him is to stay in line, to go with the flow, and not to do the kinds of things he's done over the past 10 years. And accordingly, that's pretty much what Trump will call progress. No signing is necessary. He repeated it many times. I need progress. What does progress mean in Trump's understanding? So that the whole world can see that after Trump, together with his European friends from the democratic world, drove Putin back into his pen, he needs to make sure that there are no more news reports about Putin continuing with his imperial ambitions. And what do imperial ambitions mean in the eyes of Trump's electorate? It's when Putin is bombing Kyiv. Because Americans live in Kyiv, they rarely even make it as far as Kharkiv. And so, when this stops making it into American news, that's when Trump will consider it progress. And Putin will be there, standing in his pen, constantly yapping at Ukraine anyway. Moreover, he will constantly keep your wonderful, heroic troops on edge. And he will try to turn this into a protracted conflict, so that someone is always talking to him about something, because look, he's a monster with a nuclear bomb. But at the same time, it has to be done in such a way that they don't get so angry with him that they steamroll him, which would happen if they took away India and, say, the European market from him. That would be a tragedy for Putin. In that case, Russia would quickly collapse right before our eyes in a matter of months. That's the kind of long answer I have. And I'm like that bore who, when asked how he's doing, starts telling the whole story.
Listen, but that's pretty much how it would be. Well, not exactly rosy, right? Nothing's going to be rosy anymore, considering the amount.
As you can see, there's no optimism at all at the end of my answer. It's a long, sad and difficult story.
Yeah. But, how does this bring us any closer to the result of Putin being put in his place? Lavrov says that they don't care at all about what you gathered and discussed there. Putin is once again shelling Ukrainian cities. The occupying army is trying to advance in the Pokrovsk direction and elsewhere, and further east from the north as well. So, in fact, nothing positive is actually happening in terms of actions. So far, it's just rhetoric.
Let's tell everyone that Putin has won. Sasha, no, of course that's not the case. It's just rhetoric.
No, but what does that have to do with anything? No, but what does that have to do with this? No, but what does one have to do with it? It's just that a process is unfolding now that we need to contain or halt. We're not interested, yes, in these continued shellings. So if all this keeps going on like this for years, well, I wouldn't say that's the result we're aiming for.
Sasha, you're asking me this question from the perspective of someone living in Ukraine. I live here too. And if that's how you're asking, I'll tell you completely different things. I'm answering the question you asked from the perspective of geopolitics, what's happening. From a geopolitical standpoint, what does Putin in the stall mean? Putin in the stall geopolitically means Putin, who, yes, might cause problems, but not on a global scale. There are certain conflicts that the world is quite comfortable with, and honestly, they don't care. Neither Trump nor, in fact, many Europeans who also don't care about what's happening in Ukraine, as long as it's this kind of conflict with reduced intensity, still ongoing, but not particularly bloody, not making the news that often, and not having much impact on the electorate. And this gradient is already visible, it's already clear. We shouldn't mislead our viewers here because the last time Kyiv was bombed was a long time ago. The day before yesterday, when reports started appearing in Putin's own media about how they were such heroes and were about to launch hundreds of missiles at Kyiv, I calmly went to bed, didn't go anywhere, not to any bomb shelter. I knew that not a single missile would hit Kyiv because that's just how it is. Because Kyiv, he's already set it aside. Maybe so it doesn't seem too abrupt. He might do it once or twice more, but it won't be the same madness it was before. I'm not saying this to reassure anyone. It makes no difference to me whether a person dies in Kyiv or a soldier of the Ukrainian armed forces dies somewhere near Vovchansk. For me, these are absolutely the same kind of death because every life is valuable, and that soldier was sent there not because he is somehow different or less worthy of sympathy. There shouldn't be such a distinction. He is exactly the same kind of person. He was working as an IT specialist just 2 weeks ago, and accordingly, maybe 2 weeks before the war started. So, for me, yes, if we're now asking what my opinion is from the perspective of a Ukrainian or someone living in Ukraine, as I am now, then of course that's a completely different story. I don't like the fact that, for example, in the next 10 years, Putin will still be killing people and it will still be a catastrophe. It will still be terrible. And for this to finally end, for this final pacification of Putin and his regime, something else needs to happen. And this movement also, in fact, begins at all these events like Alaska, Washington. Because look, all the leaders of the democratic world are sitting there and everyone agrees on the main point. Putin is the problem. The problem needs to be solved. How can they solve this problem? They can provide Ukraine with finances, they can give Ukraine weapons, they can protect it in other ways, and they can inflict damage on Putin. They can further damage his economy. They can, in the end, act by physical means. They can support someone, as the American administration has always done. And not just the American administration. The British and the French have also always been quite good at this. They can cooperate with someone who will remove Putin, either Putin's own elites, or accordingly, elites in alliance with some radical opposition movement, which is also in principle emerging in Russia, and this simply needs to be developed. That's why we still have a long road ahead before all of this comes to an end. We will see a decrease in intensity right before our eyes in the coming months, because Putin has been put back in his place. He got scared that he would be crushed, that this time finally they were speaking to him seriously.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
That's my opinion.
You heard what Trump said, right? He said we need another 2 weeks to understand what will happen with this war. So when will these infamous 2 weeks be over? Everyone has already forgotten about Arestovich's 2 weeks, which were considered cringe, just some kind of dust thrown in people's eyes. Now everyone is talking about Trump's 2 weeks. So they say 50 days, then 10 days.
No, I don't see it as Trump promising to end everything right now and then not following through. On the contrary, both before Alaska and before Washington, Trump actually did the opposite. Trump said that nothing would end after Alaska, nothing would end after Washington. Remember, he emphasized this many times, and then his numerous newsmakers who surround him kept supporting it. They also said that this is a long, difficult road, that it didn't work out easily because, well, it was implied between the lines, because Putin is an asshole. And accordingly, this is exactly what you can read now in all their statements. It's all clearly visible. And the way Trump reacts to Putin's antics when he bombs an American company operating on Ukrainian territory. Of course, on the one hand, yes, it's rather sluggish, and of course, it doesn't inspire optimism for you and me or for our viewers either. But nevertheless, he still sort of, yes, sent what you might call a signal to Putin, meaning if you want me to return to the rhetoric and actions of the Cold War era, then I'm ready. There are methods. I'm hinting to you that I can actually allow Ukraine to attack you more forcefully. I can help Ukraine with that. That was a direct hint. Putin is afraid of these hints, Sasha. That's a fact. Because if he weren't afraid, he wouldn't have rushed to the Washington Regional Committee. Then, after being trashed on all his Z resources, I'm not sitting on the ones that are moderated by Gromov and, accordingly, Belousov. They have these clusters there, from the Ministry of Defense, from the Kremlin. I hang out on the ones that are more grassroots. Usually there aren't that many subscribers there because they don't cross-promote each other. But at the same time, that's where you find the unvarnished truth, And the way he rushed over there to Anchorage, that was honestly just a shock for them. Wait, but these are the enemies we're supposed to be fighting for a brighter future, so they don't deprive us of resources and so on. Either you run over there to work with them because they've promised you some kind of treat. And in reality, this is an absolute fiasco. This is a complete failure of all of Putin's plans, which, in his deranged mind, he wasn't crazy before, but he became insane after those first 8 or 10 years in power. And it was in this deranged mind that these scenarios were born, which have now been crossed out. That's it. This definitely won't happen. Ukrainians have paid a huge price for this. That's why the West owes Ukraine, damn it, money, a lot of money and a lot more help. And this is exactly what needs to be squeezed out of them now, because they've already settled their own geopolitical issues. They've corralled the global bullies, scared them. They showed them that unity can arise among them when someone tries to overthrow the power of this civilized world. But at the same time, it wasn't American, French, German, or British soldiers who paid for this with their lives. They're not ready to fight at all. We know this, right? The polls conducted by international companies like Gallup, for example. And we know that Europeans are not ready to fight for their own country. They're half as willing as Ukrainians. This is in response to the talk about the territorial recruitment centers supposedly forcing everyone. No one is forcing anyone here. There are perfectly normal percentages, which are twice as high as the European average, of people who are willing and those who are not. And this is against the backdrop of all this horror that's been going on for 4 years now, if not 10. And so all of this, once again, leads us to the conclusion that A, Putin's plans have failed. B, Ukraine has become a powerful country instead of just another one of Moscow's many satellites. And in addition to this, yes, on this path, we must not mess things up, and we need to keep moving forward. Without expecting that in 2 days, Zelensky and Trump will somehow stop everything. This will be a long road. But today, there is every chance to walk this path successfully. And that's why there are so many different tracks, so many different problems. Here we are sitting and talking, and for example, not far from here in Moldova, there are processes underway, and right now there's a pretty serious showdown happening there. Once again, there's a clash between, well, those orcs from the east and the reasonable ones from Europe, and now they're trying once again to figure out who will come out on top. Thank God Europe has also learned to show its teeth in this regard. They're sending in strategists and throwing in cash. And in Romania, they did a good job. Well done. They deserve a lot of respect for that. I hope they won't mess up in Moldova either, because you see, it's from all these little threads that the fabric of future independence is being woven today. The future success of Ukraine, the future success of a democratic Ukraine that will be one of the leaders of a free Europe. I'm sure of that. I am sure you won't make mistakes, because you have paid too high a price to learn how to think and to understand the political process.
Rostislav, that's clear from a strategic perspective. I also believe what you're saying about Putin's plans, they have already, let's say, run into failure and turned into a fiasco for the Kremlin dictator. Let's talk about the current, let's say, diplomatic situation. Trump clearly stated that within a mere 2 weeks, he will definitively change his established stance and very likely significantly alter his entire approach to both Russia and Ukraine. I'm currently reading the breaking news that essential oil deliveries to Hungary have now been completely halted following the recent and significant strike on the crucial Druzhba pipeline, which is a vital energy artery. This was reported by Sijarto as well, and in my view, it appears to me that one of the tools could be effectively depriving Russia of the ability to further transport its oil products, fossil fuels, and so on. And what the Ukrainian defense forces are handling very well is the Volgograd oil refinery and other major ones that are among the top 10, top 20 refineries in the Russian Federation. Please explain, could this change in attitude from Trump be expressed in something concrete, in something tangible? For example, we allow Ukraine to strike oil facilities on Russian territory. We supply new types of weapons. So what are the specifics of this shift in attitude toward Russia? How will it be manifested here?
Of course, I would like to cheer everyone up or inspire some optimism, but we need to be realistic. And I want to say that it will still be a pendulum, and Trump will give something to Ukraine or agree to something like those same strikes on, for example, oil facilities, right? Or against some other serious targets with long-range weapons, which thank God Ukraine now has. Or he might not do this depending on the specific situation in the news on Fox Channel. If the situation in the news on Fox Channel suits him, then he won't give Ukraine any of the things I mentioned above. Because for Trump today, unfortunately, the world doesn't revolve around Ukraine or people's lives. Everything for him is very much tied to electoral prospects. He now has literally just a few months or even weeks left before the start of a tough electoral battle with the Democrats for Congress. And now he will do everything solely based on this paradigm. And if Putin, so to speak, in his attempts to show that he's still tough, still not subdued, and still tries to act against the will of the leaders of the democratic world, he will undoubtedly make these attempts. But if Trump sees these attempts as excessive, then Trump will give something to Ukraine, and this will be considered excessive in only one way, by Fox News. Now I start and end everything with them. If I see a report there that an American company was bombed, meaning by the orcs, then I understand that something will be coming Putin's way too, at least in terms of information. If I see that this news didn't make it there, then I understand that nothing will happen. It's all very simple.
Well, let's discuss this as we wrap up. After all, the topic of a possible meeting between Zelensky and Putin still hasn't gone away. What do you think? Will this meeting happen? Or is it, as you said before, just a smokescreen and we shouldn't even discuss it as a hypothetical? This meeting definitely won't happen. There's no need to discuss it. The only place they might catch a glimpse of each other, like through a peephole as that song goes, is at some big meeting, some major summit, where there are lots of people from Ukraine, from Russia, and probably from other countries as well. And maybe there, somewhere in the crowd, he'll dare to look at Zelensky. He wouldn't dare to do it outside the crowd. He's not a politician at all. He's never gone through any electoral procedures. He's never had any debates with competitors. He was always scared, forgive me, dear viewers. Not even debates with Zhirinovsky, with Zhuganov, with Malishkin, God forgive me, with Davankov and with all his other little monkeys and Cheburashkas they put up as mock opponents for him. This is a man who has nothing to say in response to direct and properly formulated questions, and Zelensky knows how to ask them properly because he has actually made it in politics. No matter how any of my Ukrainian friends feel about him, people have different opinions.
But this is definitely something Putin will avoid until the very last moment. At most, he'll look across some long table and maybe nod at something or make some kind of statement. That's the most we're going to see. And even that won't happen anytime soon.
In conclusion, European leaders are now discussing a commitment to provide Ukraine with military aid within 24 days if Russia attacks again. Bloomberg reports on this. According to them, this proposal was put forward by Italy's Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni. Essentially, it's the same as NATO's Article 5, but kind of outside of NATO. Tell me, please, can Ukraine even agree to something like this? Because it sounds very vague and unclear. And personally, I don't believe in any of this.
Let's put it this way, friends. There's no such thing as NATO's Article 5. It simply doesn't exist. Imagine that it just doesn't exist and never actually existed. Because, of course, they've turned it into some kind of, magic pill that's supposed to solve all of Ukraine's problems. And that's not the case. This pill doesn't exist at all. There are just some bureaucratic documents which, if you carefully read them, even if you just open up Wikipedia, my dear friends, you'll clearly see that it explicitly states if some particular country is attacked, then they might seriously consider getting involved in the conflict. They might. It's like in that movie, right? Can Pavlik fly to Leningrad? He can. And can Zora? Zora can too. They both can. That's all that's written in Article 5. So when people talk about things even more ephemeral than Article 5 itself, like we'll do something like Article 5, but not Article 5, it's all absolute nonsense. In modern politics, only pragmatism works, only power, and accordingly, only things that bring some kind of benefit to certain politicians or bring electoral points in the information field. Because the entire nation is controlled by media, as the legendary Green Day sang, they sang that about America. But now it applies to the whole world. Now everyone is working for media exposure, working for likes and reposts. And that's why, in the end, let's ask our viewers to give us likes, reposts too, for both of us, and let them check out my channel as well. There I go on even more passionately and enthusiastically about all these quite important and significant topics, discussing them in considerable detail.
Yes, friends. Subscribe to Rostyslav Murzahulov's channel. By the way, he didn't ask for this, but I remembered that, in fact, there are different streams coming out there every day. So it's always interesting. I think you'll enjoy following his analytics there. Rostislav, thank you and welcome back to our platform. Happy to see you. Rostyslav Murzahulov, political strategist, was on air with Ukraine today. The project is called Razborka.
I always love these discussions.